Welcome into CBS News 24/7. I'm Elizabeth Cook. A desperate search at the site of a popular nightclub reduced to rubble. We are live on the ground in the Dominican Republic. Right now, there's a scramble to identify victims in a collapse that killed over 100 people. But first, a look at Wall Street. Right now, the Dow and S&P are creeping up, with the stock market seeing really seesawing right now, sort of hovering around this number. It was above 300 just a moment ago. Now it's about 283. Traders are reacting to this intensifying trade war and this standoff between the world's largest economies. China vowing to fight to the end, slapping an 84% tariff on U.S. imports after President Trump enacted 104% duties on Chinese goods. Now the EU also biting back, saying it will impose $23 billion in tariffs on a range of U.S. imports. Now, those announcements came just hours after Trump's reciprocal tariffs went into effect on roughly 60 countries and the EU. And that's on to the blanket of 10% baseline tariffs that began on Saturday. Now, the major tariff making deadline is a whopping 104% on China. The White House says Trump is still waiting for a call from China to discuss an end to this escalating tariffs. In the meantime, the president says about 70 countries reached out to negotiate lower tariffs. Leaders from Japan, South Korea, and Italy are expected to visit the White House next week to meet with President Trump. The European Union, Vietnam, and Zimbabwe already proposed their deal to end the taxes. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent gave more insight into the ongoing deals during a Q&A at the American Bankers Association. Take a listen to that.
I was out telling other countries, don't retaliate. And I think what a lot of people are missing here is that the levels that were put out last Wednesday are a ceiling. So if you don't retaliate, that is the ceiling. I'm going to take a lead negotiating role in a lot of the tariffs, starting with the Japanese delegation. But in terms of escalation, unfortunately, the biggest offender in the global trading system is China. And they're the only country who's escalated. And I can tell the rest of the world that I'm not sure whether it was the prime minister or the economic minister in Spain made some comments this morning. Oh, well, maybe we should align ourselves more with China. That would be cutting your own throat. I think, Rob, at the end of the day, that we can probably reach a deal with our allies, with the other countries that have been long-term. They've been good military allies, not perfect economic allies, and then we can approach China as a group.
Meanwhile, President Trump took to social media today to calm the country in this time of great uncertainty. He put out several posts, including, quote, "Be cool. Everything is going to work out well. This is a great time to buy and make America great again." CBS News business contributor Javier David stands by to break down what this means for your wallet. But first, let's bring in CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. He is live in front of the White House with more on all of this. I've really been enjoying your performance at some of these press conferences, Ed. You've been asking great questions. And we've heard that the White House says these reciprocal tariffs are non-negotiable. But now Trump is welcoming leaders to the Oval Office to talk. Do you have an idea of the strategy here?
Oh, Liz, it's been hard to follow, but at this point, as you heard the Treasury Secretary say there, they do want to talk, and they're happily take China's calls, but they have to call. We know, as he said, that he's beginning these negotiations with Japan. Japanese officials tell us he was in touch with them yesterday, was expected to be again today, and in the coming days, there's expected to be a little more details sorted out about what exactly they would negotiate. The president himself, of course, met with the Prime Minister of Israel earlier this week. He spoke with the leader of Vietnam last week. The South Koreans have been in touch, but that's just a handful. When they say or claim that 70 countries have reached out, we've asked for the list of who exactly has, and they won't give it to us quite yet. So either they're hearing from 70 or they're not, or they are, but they don't want to reveal who. And as he suggested there, the Treasury Secretary, they would like to get all of these countries that are now being tariffed to rally to the American side to put pressure on China to help drive down the imbalance between the two largest economies, the United States and China.
Yeah, the mixed messaging is tricky to comprehend some days, Ed. But just moments ago, the Chinese embassy in the U.S. posted on social media with an update on exports. It says exports of dual-use items to 12 American companies will be prohibited, while any ongoing related export activities must be stopped immediately. Ed, do you know if this is in response to Trump's suggestion to impose tariffs on pharmaceutical imports?
We don't, but what it does signal, Liz, and what it should remind all of us is how interconnected the two economies are, despite this sort of frenemy status that we have with China, right? That you may have items that are ultimately sold in the United States and assembled in the United States, but there are supplies or parts of those products that are made elsewhere and shipped into the United States for final assembly. And what China's doing now is cutting off key pieces of pharmaceuticals, military equipment, drones, and other supplies that then get used in various ways by American firms and American consumers and the American government. And that is a sign of how it is they're trying to squeeze the United States too. There's domestic political concerns on both sides of this. The president here, of course, obviously trying to fulfill a campaign pledge, prove a point that he's believed for more than 30 years, that tariffs ultimately can work to bend the world to the American economy's benefit. But the Chinese are also of the belief that you can't bend to that kind of a pressure, and that should Chinese leadership ever have to, it could cause real domestic political turmoil for them. So we're in a staring contest as this trade war gets underway, and the rest of the world's watching to see whether the United States or China blinks first, and whether there will be any outreach between the two countries. So far, best we can tell, there has not been.
Yeah, I can't tell if this is a game of chicken, Ed, or if it's a poker game. It kind of depends on the day, it feels like.
Maybe it's chickens playing poker. Who knows? We'll see.
I wouldn't be surprised. Ed O'Keefe, great job, sir. Always good to talk to you. Meantime, a Texas judge has just temporarily blocked Trump administration deportations that use the Alien Enemies Act. That came at the request of the ACLU on behalf of 3 Venezuelan men deported to El Salvador. So let's bring in CBS News Justice correspondent Scott McFarland. He is in Washington. Scott, thank you so much for being with us. What does the Texas judge's order mean for mass deportation flights? The Supreme Court gave the green light to yesterday. Are they on hold again? What does this mean?
Some of this is now happening piecemeal, where you have individual people suing to ensure they're not part of any Alien Enemies Act 1798 style deportation without proper court review or due process. The judge in Texas has, for now, temporarily issued an order protecting those individuals and potentially those in the Southern District of Texas from being part of the next flight in which the Alien Enemies Act is used. A New York federal judge in the Southern District of New York has also issued an order protecting multiple people who are in Orange County, New York, just upstate from New York City, from being part of the next Alien Enemies Act deportation as well. But this is different than what happened a few weeks ago when a judge in Washington halted all Alien Enemies Act deportations. The Supreme Court has cracked open the door for those to resume as long as there's due process, but for now, that'll be anybody except those in the Southern District of Texas and these individuals in the Southern District of New York. It all feels like it's real piecemeal now, and the due process requirement is the one sweeping part of what the Supreme Court has done.
And Scott, I want to talk about another sort of related case. It has to do with immigration. A Louisiana-based immigration judge telling the Department of Homeland Security turn over the evidence that it has to justify deporting the Columbia University graduate student Mahmoud Khalil, or she will drop the case. So what happens if they don't comply?
Oh, they put a deadline on this too. It would have to be information provided to the judge in Louisiana within a matter of hours. And the judge has said if she doesn't get information that justifies or defends this deportation, that she is going to have the case dropped, at least the case in front of her dropped. This is a different matter. This is a student here on a visa, not an undocumented immigrant, not a foreign national, but somebody who was given permission to be in the United States, from whom the Trump administration is stripping the ability to be here in the United States, alleging he has some ties to the protests over Gaza in recent months, in the last year or so. But this matter is really a frontline case that could represent more to come as the administration tries to take action against more university-based students who are here from international allies on visas.
And we also understand that Attorney General Pam Bondi has announced a formation of a Second Amendment task force. So what is that? What's that all about?
And we're going to find out. She is the chair of this new Second Amendment task force, and her deputy is going to be the #2 official in charge of this Second Amendment task force. In her one-page memo reviewed by CBS News, the Attorney General indicates the mission of this task force is to ensure the Second Amendment is not infringed upon, indicating it may investigate, target, or try to negotiate with jurisdictions, states, cities, who have their own gun control or gun safety measures. But it's also noteworthy in terms of timing. The Attorney General announcing a priority in protecting the Second Amendment is happening while there is no full-time confirmed director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And there seems to be less responsiveness from that agency to media, to public officials, fewer staffers inside the building than there were in the prior administration. There's concern about a gutting of the ATF and its gun safety regulation enforcement. At the same time, the administration is announcing Second Amendment protections. That's the first chapter of the Bondi administration in the Department of Justice, one that she is trying to prioritize Second Amendment rights.
You know, we started this conversation with you, Scott, talking about the deportations to El Salvador. I want to go back to probably the highest profile individual in that group of individuals sent to El Salvador. The wife of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father of 3, mistakenly deported to that prison, headed to Capitol Hill today. That's where she's getting support from a group of lawmakers also calling for his release. Are we expecting any movement from the courts to push in order to bring him home at all?
Yeah, we sure could hear from the Supreme Court as early as this afternoon or this evening. They are looking at an appeal, or they're looking at a lower court order which required the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia to the United States by Monday. The Supreme Court has paused that for a closer look. His wife, Jennifer Vasquez, on Capitol Hill this afternoon and over the past few days has made the argument unequivocally that she says her husband has no gang ties, is not a foreign terrorist. The Department of Justice has acknowledged he was deported by mistake in those flights to El Salvador March 15th. What the Supreme Court does next is going to be interesting, though, outside of this one case. It would ensure the return of Mr. Abrego Garcia if they rule in his favor, but also speaks to a larger issue. The Department of Justice says they can't get him back because he's in El Salvador, and the Supreme Court might want to weigh in on that part because there may be others in third country prisons the government wants to get back or others want to have returned.
All right, Scott McFarland, there are so many cases to break down. Thank you for keeping us updated on all of them. Well, coming up, we are on the ground in the Dominican Republic at the site of that horrible roof collapse at a popular nightclub. Crews there still digging through the rubble, searching for survivors. You're watching CBS News 24/7. A popular nightclub in the heart of the Dominican Republic, now the scene of devastation and a frantic search and rescue operation. Hundreds of people were inside the Jet Set nightclub when the roof collapsed during a concert on Tuesday. At least 120 people are dead and over 150 are injured. As search teams comb through the wreckage, they are holding out hope that more survivors will be found trapped underneath all that rubble. Now, there's a scramble to identify the victims as well. Families have been gathering around the site, anxiously waiting for answers about their missing loved ones, hoping to find their names on the list of people who made it out alive. Among the dead is Dominican singer Ruby Perez. He was on stage performing when that roof came down. And 2 former Major League players were also killed in the collapse. 51-year-old Octavio Dotel died on the way to the hospital after being pulled out from the rubble. Dotel pitched for 13 Major League teams in a 15-year career and won a World Series with the St. Louis Cardinals. And the MLB posted this photo on social media confirming the death of Tony Blanco, a former Washington Nationals player. CBS News correspondent Christian Benavides is live on the ground in Santo Domingo. Christian, there's a lot going on around behind you. You see the image is a little fuzzy there. What are you seeing and hearing about the search and recovery efforts right now?
Liz, those efforts are indeed ongoing. I want you to sort of get a look at what the scene looks like here. This tent that has been set up right there, there's another white tent right behind it. That's been set up for family members who are waiting to hear news about their loved ones. Right over here, can see, that is what remains of the jet set nightclub. And officials have been working here around the clock. I mean, the search and rescue teams that have been out here, they haven't stopped since all of this, since the incident took place. I want you to just sort of, as we navigate the scene over here, as I mentioned, there's so many people here, along with the families that are here. There are also volunteers that are looking to just help the families, bring them water, bring them food, and just sort of bring items that they may need. We were speaking to a father here a little bit earlier with Luis, and something that he... ¿Me puede mostrar esto? Disculpe. Señor, gracias. Thank you, excuse me. This is sort of what's been happening now, is that some families are starting to show up with pictures of their loved ones who haven't been found yet. We had a long conversation a little bit earlier about the last conversation that this man had. Muchas gracias. That this man had with his daughter, essentially saying that she was on her way to the nightclub, and this was something sort of that it was sort of a tradition. I mean, you got to think that this nightclub, the event that is held here every Monday, is something that so many people here in Santo Domingo attended. It's sort of a staple of this venue, the live music that is held here. And what's also interesting about it is that you've got this sort of who's who of Dominican culture that comes to watch these artists perform live, which is why when you hear about the death toll and you hear about some of the victims that have been recovered, you hear about former Major League Baseball players, the governor of a province that was found. So at this point, the search and rescue efforts are ongoing. I spoke to the Minister of Health here from the Dominican Republic. He told me that there is currently about 80-some people that are still unaccounted for. That was the last time that we spoke. We've seen a couple of bodies that have been pulled from the rubble. And unaccounted for just means that families and loved ones have been showing up here to report that they can't find them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're in the rubble.
Yeah, Christian Benavides, thank you so much for setting the scene for us. I think for a lot of us, it's seeing the imagery and hearing the amount of people that were inside that nightclub is just sort of unfathomable. And then just those brave rescue crews that are working around the clock nonstop to try to recover anybody that's left. Thank you so much for that report. All right, with the trade war escalating, we hear from people from two very different perspectives on how tariffs could impact them. Stay with us right here on CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. All right, China, we know, is upping its retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. to 84%. That's up from about 34%. And meanwhile, President Trump's trade chief, Jamieson Greer, is testifying before Congress members for the second day this week, this time defending the tariffs before the House Ways and Means Committee. Here's some of what we've heard. Take a listen.
These measures are aimed squarely at achieving reciprocity and reducing our massive trade deficit. This national emergency declaration and tariff action is the most significant change in U.S. trade policy since we allowed China, unfortunately, to join the World Trade Organization. The American working class, in particular, has suffered concentrated losses from the so-called China shock and other adverse effects of past trade policy and the conditions that give rise to our massive trade deficit. The United States has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs and 90,000 factories since 1994. President Biden left us with a $1.2 trillion trade deficit in goods, the largest of any country in the history of the world.
Okay, let's get right to CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian. Nicole, great to see you. What else are we learning from today's testimony?
Well, kind of similar to what we saw yesterday when the U.S. Trade Representative was here on Capitol Hill speaking to the Senate Finance Committee. He again continued to defend the president's policies on tariffs, and mostly we heard a lot of Democrats, of course, being very critical of the administration and its approach, although some Republicans did ask some measured questions as well. You know, really what this comes down to, and after sitting in the Senate hearing yesterday, you know, you're hearing concern on both sides of the aisle from Democrats and Republicans on how this is impacting their respective states and districts. That they're getting calls from small businesses from various sectors and industries, farmers, you know, Main Street, mom and pop type shops, you know, where there are a lot of concerns about the trickle down effect of this tariff policy. So from that standpoint, you know, the U.S. Trade Representative got a lot of incoming, but again, he tried to assuage concerns by saying, look, this has been something that is long overdue in terms of trying to reset the trade deficit, that this is something that the president is ultimately committing to seeing through, that he continues to have these discussions with countries around the world. But again, it is not tamping down some of the concerns lawmakers have here on Capitol Hill.
And Nicole, we're also, still keeping watch on this budget resolution. It has passed in the Senate, but we're still waiting on the House. Any update on if the Republican holdouts will get on board?
Yeah, well, I mean, keep in mind, again, this is a multi-step process here. So this resolution that the Speaker would like to see his members vote on this week are simply the instructions that will guide the process to how they want to ultimately craft this so-called big, beautiful bill. But it did get a big endorsement from the president just last night in terms of him pushing the House particularly to move on this. Obviously, the Senate has already acted on this resolution, but in terms of the House, there's still some questions and a little bit of mistrust between the House and the Senate in terms of how deep of spending cuts they will ultimately have to make to pay for the president's legislative agenda, particularly when it comes to extending his tax cuts.
Nicole Killian, thank you so much for joining us live from Capitol Hill. Now, I want to get to some breaking news from the White House right now. President Trump just announced a 90-day pause on all reciprocal tariffs as part of a social media post. I want you to take a look at the Dow right now, up 2,300 points, and has been rising ever since that announcement. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, we're going to check in with him when we come back. But again, Trump just announced on social media a 90-day pause on all tariffs except for China, and that sent the Dow up at least 2,200 points. We're going to keep on top of this. You are watching CBS News 24/7. All right, let's get back to that breaking news from the White House. President Trump announcing a 90-day pause on all reciprocal tariffs as part of the social media post. It's a 90-day pause on tariffs except for China. This is what the president posted online just now. I'm hereby raising the tariff charge to China by the United States. Actually, let's get to the press secretary. She is talking right now. Let's listen in.
From around the world reach out to President Trump and his team here at the White House to negotiate better trade deals for the American worker. We have been overwhelmed with the amount of requests from countries around the world. I'll let the Secretary speak to that. We will continue with the tailor-made negotiations that I spoke about yesterday. In the meantime, there will be a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs as these negotiations are ongoing, and the tariff level will be brought down to a universal 10% tariff. The Secretary here has been a huge part of the President's trade team, of course, and will continue to lead these negotiations moving forward to look out for the American worker, which is always President Trump's goal. So I'll kick it over to our great Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
Good, thank you. And we saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today. It has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. It took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
Ed, go ahead.
Treasury Secretary, thank you for doing this. Let me ask you 3 quick things, if I could, just for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
Well, China, no, China.
Mexico and Canada, are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors, and what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see. I'm seeing Vietnam today. Japan's at the front of the queue. South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced the tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
And, if I could just, excuse me, Raquel, if I could just add to what the Secretary said. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called, because the United States of America is the best place in the world to do business. And as the president has shown great courage, as the Secretary has said, in choosing to retaliate against China even higher. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Treasury Secretary Besson. Can you explain more of the decision-making on what feels like a reversal here? I mean, just these went into effect less than 15 hours ago, these tariffs. Why the pause now? What led to that?
No. Again, President Trump created maximum negotiating leverage for himself, and which tariffs went into effect 15 hours ago? The ones that we have lowered went into effect a week ago. They were announced a week ago, and we've just been overwhelmed by the response from mostly our allies who want to come and negotiate in good faith. So we are expecting them to come with their best deal.
This is a CBS News special report. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Maurice Dubois. President Trump making big news this afternoon. He's just announced a 90-day pause on tariffs for many countries around the world. In a Truth Social post here, it's a lengthy one. I'm going to read it to you. The president said, based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world's markets, I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125%, effective immediately. At some point, he said, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, including the Departments of Commerce, Treasury, and the USTR, that's the U.S. Trade Representative, to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relative to trade, trade barriers, tariffs, currency manipulation, and non-monetary tariffs, and that these countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape, or form against the United States. I have authorized, the president says here, a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And that is the entirety of the president's Truth Social post there. All this has the stock market surging right now, up 5 and 3.3% there, up some 2,000 points at this moment. It's been going back and forth. Let's bring in our Money Watch correspondent, Kelly O'Grady. First reaction here, Kelly, what in the wide world is going on here?
You're seeing a lot of relief in the markets right now. I mean, we are coming off a sell-off this past week and a half at this point. And I'm just going to quote a couple of numbers for you. The NASDAQ is inching up about 8% right now. S&P 500, 6%. Both the S&P and NASDAQ were either flirting with or in bear market territory prior to this announcement. That basically means when that index has lost 20% or more from their recent highs. And it basically just means investors are cautious, they're worried, they're nervous. And you see the fact that we're coming back from this really in the tech stocks and the chip sector. And why? Because if you're going to have a tariff that was once over 30% on countries that we rely on for chips that power the AI industry, and by the way, your 401k too. Right, Taiwan, and that's going to go down to 10%. That's why investors are reacting so positively right now.
But this is a 90-day pause. That gives them some level of certainty, quote unquote, for the moment. But this is not a long-term thing. So sugar high or not, that remains to be seen. Talk about the psychology here that leads to this kind of euphoric feeling.
And that's exactly right. In fact, I'm texting with investors right now saying, how are you feeling? Is this temporary? Sugar high, I think, is a good way to describe this because we have seen the president with Canada, with Mexico, with other countries do this pause before, where we're going to do it, now we're not going to do it, and at some point in the future, that levy does get put on, those tariffs do get put on. So the investors that I'm talking to are sort of getting back in the sectors where they think that this is going to be a positive, but they are still very cautious because we have seen this change so rapidly, which gets to that uncertainty point, Maurice.
Right. Are you surprised? Or should we be surprised? Or did people see this coming all along? I'm wondering.
Well, I'm never surprised now when we talk about tariffs, Maurice.
Right.
That's the one thing you can be certain about.
Right.
No, people did not expect this today, and that's why you saw, sell-off happening, so much uncertainty in the market. And there's actually this metric that we track about uncertainty. Investors were predicting so much uncertainty over the next 30 days. So no one expected this. And I think right now investors, one actually texted me right before I got on with you, and he said, expect the unexpected. And that is what I'm telling my clients going forward.
Truly. Okay, Kelly, thank you so much. Let's go to Margaret Brennan now. She's in Washington. Margaret, do you have any sense of what led to this moment?
Well, Maurice, in some quick calls I made before coming to speak with you, I was trying to discern exactly that. What I can tell you is that there were two big things that happened today that would be weighing on President Trump's mind. One of them was not just the sell-off in stocks that's been ongoing, but a big shift here when it came to particularly foreign buyers not being very excited about buying U.S. government debt. That short-term debt sale that was supposed to happen, that happens on Wednesday and Thursday, there was a lack of interest from foreign buyers. So not necessarily foreign buyers coming in and selling U.S. government debt, which is how we finance a lot of things in this country, but a concern saying and showing that there is concern about the long-term and short-term economic health of the United States. Two, you also see over on Capitol Hill some concern about getting the president's budget framework through the House of Representatives. We know as of this weekend, the Speaker of the House was trying to voice confidence that he could get this budget framework through. This is the way they can sort of expedite the other plank of the president's economic platform. Remember, he promised all these tax cuts and funding the border and other Republican initiatives. That got harder for him when he saw some members of the Republican Party stand up and say, I don't like what you're doing in my state when it comes to farmers, for example, who are going to be hit by retaliatory tariffs or the fallout from them. So you had two things weighing on the president's mind there. One, the other plank of his economic platform may be in peril because of the sequencing being off since he went into a trade war without moving the other part of his economic platform first. So the votes were a problem. Also, when it came to the market, nervousness. And you can see, we're looking at the Dow Jones Industrial Index there and stocks, but if you look at the debt markets, there was a lot of concern there today. So those are two factors. As one investor said to me, the White House pulled the knife out of their own heart. This wasn't a victory. We did hear from the Treasury Secretary promise of future negotiations with the Japanese and the South Koreans. But CBS reporting to this point is that there isn't really a negotiation underway. There are talks about having talks. So there isn't a deal that was announced here. And when it comes to China, where the Treasury Secretary was saying he's really focused, we don't have any contact at this point.
Okay, Margaret, and as you're speaking there, we see the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, there speaking to reporters outside the White House. If Margaret's still there, I just want to ask you one more question there, Margaret. Can we read anything into the 90 days that the president is going to pause these tariffs? Does 90 days have anything to do with budget negotiations by any chance?
That's an interesting timetable to point to there. In terms of what we knew the expectations were for the votes on those things, that there is the hope that they could get the tax cuts and all that business done by August at the very latest. So the timetables and the sequencing, it's useful to take this off the table is the short answer to your question.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on that as well. Margaret Brennan, thank you so much for the insight. Our coverage of the tariff pause will continue on CBS News 24/7, your local news, and tonight, of course, on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News Special Report. I'm Maurice Dubois.
And you were just watching a CBS News special report on this breaking news out of the White House. President Trump pausing tariffs on most nations for 90 days, but raising taxes on Chinese imports to 125%. President Trump posting this online: I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States of America to 125% effective immediately. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, I have authorized a 90-day pause. Now, earlier in front of the White House, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke out about this pause. Let's listen into his comments from just moments ago.
Let me ask you three quick things, if I could, just for the sake of clarity, because the markets are open and they're wondering. First of all, Mexico and China, are they part of this 10% universal?
Well, China. No, China.
Mexico and Canada, are they part of the 10%?
Yes.
Okay. Second, given then that you have the rest of the world essentially calling it, it's not China, is this now just all about China?
Well, it's about bad actors, and what we will see is some of the very early countries are China's neighbors. That we're going to see. I'm seeing Vietnam today. Japan's at the front of the queue. South Korea, India. So we will see. And as I've repeatedly said, and President Trump has been saying it for years, China is the most imbalanced economy in the history of the modern world, and they are the biggest source of the U.S. trade problems. And indeed, they are problems for the rest of the world, because what we've seen is that as the U.S. announced a tariff wall last week, many of those goods have already started flooding into Europe.
So as you see it now, this trade war is China versus the rest of the world?
Well, I'm not calling it a trade war, but I'm saying that China has escalated, and President Trump responded very courageously to that, and we are going to work on a solution with our trading partners.
And if I could just, excuse me, Raquel, if I could just add to what the Secretary said. Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here. You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them. And that's exactly why more than 75 countries have called, because the United States of America is the best place in the world to do business. And as the president has shown great courage, as the Secretary has said, in choosing to retaliate against China even higher. Elena, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Treasury Secretary Bessent. Can you explain more of the decision making?
All right, I want to bring Javier David back in here. Javier, first, easiest question. What's your reaction to what we just witnessed here in the past 10 minutes?
Well, what the market wants, the market gets. It can bully the Fed into cutting rates. It can bully Washington politicians. And if you remember the lesson of the brief tenure of the UK Prime Minister Liz Truss. The bond market's the biggest bully of all, and it can intimidate anyone and push politicians out of office. So that's what we're seeing. Once bond markets started registering its disapproval of what was going on, the game changed. I heard the Treasury Secretary just say that Japan is at the front of the queue. There's a reason for that. They are the single biggest holder in international terms, $1.1 trillion worth of Treasury bonds. China's the next one. And if you pick a fight with your creditors, they can inflict real pain on you. And so I think that the Trump administration is learning a very painful lesson of the limits of political power in the bully pulpit.
You know, Scott Bessent there, the Treasury Secretary, said that China is really the main pain point when it comes to the U.S. economy. Can you go into that a little bit, like why the U.S. feels like China is such a thorn in its side when it comes to trade and the economy?
Well, it is a strategic competitor, but it is also has this really strange symbiotic relationship with the United States. They trade with us, we trade with them. We absolutely kind of need one another. But the reality is China has turned itself into the sort of manufacturing warehouse of the world. They produce a lot and they send a lot. And they are very, very stringent about how they allow foreign companies and foreign economies to operate within their borders. So this has been a fight that's been running for decades. And, you know, it's not going to go anywhere, but we're really have reaching something of a tipping point, or a flashpoint rather. And the Trump administration is not going to let this go. And they are right to challenge some of what China's policies are and the way that they defend their own turf. But doing it with 104% tariffs may not be the way to go.
So earlier in this newscast, you said, you know, your advice to people who might have a little bit of money in the stock market, or just regular people who are worried about their grocery bills. What should they be doing about their money right now? What's your advice now over the next 90 days? Is it the same?
Yeah, I mean, look, unless you're retiring tomorrow or next week or anywhere in the immediate term, and in the immediate term, I mean like a month, I wouldn't look at your 401k. It's not going to be good. Don't upset yourself. And it's not good to make emotional investment decisions. But the best thing to do for people that are trying to ride out this volatility, maybe shift a little to cash. The bond market has showed us that that's not the safety bet that we all once thought it was. So that's a dicier proposition, but there's a lot of money moving into cash. And so maybe that's the way to go. And cash, in fact, will give you a little bit of yield, not as much as it did a while back, but because the interest rates have come down, but there's a little bit of a reward to being a saver nowadays.
All right, Javier David, thank you so much for being on standby for this breaking news. I know that they're going to talk to you in the next show. Thank you, sir. Well, let's bring in CBS News correspondent Chanel Call, who is following this story from us from the newsroom. That press conference in front of the White House with Scott Bessent. We cut out of there for a minute. What else did he have to say, Chanel?
Well, I want to pick up on a point that you were just chatting about with Javier, because when asked if this pause was a response to the plunging stock market, Scott Bessent said, no, this was driven, in fact, by the president's strategy. He also added that last week's announcement was the ceiling, essentially, and now this 10% tariff is the floor. He says, while this 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs is in place, quote, everything is on the table. And you remember the White House has said 75 countries have already reached out to the Trump administration to book meetings to try to negotiate a deal. Bessent says now the U.S. will speak to each country separately. These will essentially be separate, bespoke negotiations. When it comes to China, I want to mention Bessent said today what China is doing will have an impact for them more than us here in the U.S. because he says they have an export-driven model. But again, listen, big news this hour, Trump pushing pause on those reciprocal tariffs for 90 days.
And Chanel, did Bessent say anything about why the 90 days, why that length of time? Is it to meet with these different countries?
Yeah, there's a suggestion here that because of the sheer volume, we're talking about 75 different countries trying to book meetings with White House officials to renegotiate these tariffs, that this will take time to go through all of these meetings and to try to figure out what the path forward will look like.
And the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, said, you know, we all have to read the art of the deal. This is all part of Trump's playbook. I'm curious, did Scott Bessent say anything after that about the so-called art of the deal? Is this an indication that this is our strategy here? Did he allude to anything like that?
Well, I mentioned that there were questions from reporters outside the White House. Why? And why now? Because we've been talking about this the last couple of days, what we've been seeing in the stock market with things plunging so recently. And he said, no, it's not what's happening in the stock market that drove this decision today. It's part of the president's strategy.
All right, CBS News correspondent Chanel Call, thanks so much for keeping an eye on that. All right, so another live look at the big board right now. President Trump pausing tariffs on most nations for 90 days. The Dow currently up 2,500 points. But he's also raising taxes on Chinese imports to 125%. The market's starkly responding to that. President Trump posted this online. I am hereby raising the tariff charge to China by the U.S. to 125% effective immediately. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, I have authorized a 90-day pause. We're going to have much more ahead right here on CBS News 24/7. Lindsay Reiser takes over right after this.